In this video, we'll discuss some of the best practices of organizing Unity projects. Our objectives will be to organize the project assets and organize the hierarchy. So let's clean up our project a bit before it gets too out of hand. As we discussed last week, folders are a great way to keep your assets or your files organized. So you can see we've already got some folders here with the standard assets and the audio that we brought in, the scripts that we brought in. But we've created a few new assets here. So I always like to name things by their type. So for example, I'm going to create a folder for the scene or the scenes. I'll call it scenes, and then drag my level into that. This is an alphabetically listed list of assets. So if you want scenes at the top, one shortcut is you can rename this, put an underscore, and that'll bubble it to the top. So, you know, a lot of people like to do this and just have their scenes always right at the top. You can see we've got a few prefabs here, so I'll create a folder for prefabs. So these will be my custom prefabs. So I accidentally created it in my scenes folder, so let me drag that out. And I'm going to put my two prefabs in there, so the bumper prefab and the floor prefab will be in my prefabs folder now, and my custom material. So let me go ahead and create the folder for that. I'm not going to make the same mistake twice, so let me just deselect everything, so when I create the folder, it will create it at the top level. And go ahead and call this materials, and then place the bumper material inside of that. Okay, so at the top level now, my project has scenes, audio, editor, materials, prefabs, scripts, and standard assets. And of course, this maps to the files and folders in the project on the operating system. But what about our hierarchy? Last week, we talked about parent-child relationships between game objects. From an organizational perspective, a parent game object is very similar to a folder in the project. Therefore, we can create what are called empty game objects to act as an organizational tool. So let's go ahead and do that. So under the hierarchy, we can go ahead and create an empty game object. So it created an empty game object called game object, and notice that the game object has a transform component, so it isn't exactly empty. If you look out in the scene, notice you don't visually see anything because there's no mesh renderer on it, but it is a game object that exists in the scene. We're going to put a variety of children under this game object. So remember, child elements transform is based on the position from the parent origin. If we want the child's transform to make sense to the world origin, it's always best to put the parent game object at the origin of the world. And this one happens to be at the origin of the world, so it's at 0, 0, 0 with no rotation, no scale. If that wasn't the case, go ahead and select the gear and select reset, put it back at the origin. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to label this so I can click it and hit return and type environment. So this is going to hold all of the pieces of my environment. So that includes the bumpers. So let me drag the bumpers and the floor and rest of the bumpers all down into the environment. So now I've got a nice and tidy hierarchy here where all of my various pieces of the level are held in the environment subfolder. And they're all based off of the parent transform, once again, which is at the origin. So if I look at these directly, their positioning makes sense to the origin of the world as it does to the parent game object. In the next video, we'll discuss how to use physics in our game.